100 Stories is a new video and podcast series that's intended to provide a platform for people of colour to share their experiences of prejudice and journeys to success.
So I'm Jamila from Sussex Innovation, and I'm here on this 100 Stories episode interviewing Mo from Watch This Space. So feel free to introduce yourself, Mo.
Hi, I'm Mo from Watch This Space. Looking forward to this. Yeah,
it's very exciting. I think you're going to be our first official guest, so congratulations. So we're just going to talk a bit about Mo's life and, where she's come from, and it's very exciting. So first and foremost, I guess just kind of tell me about where you're from, where you grew up, your childhood, parents. Anything.
Yeah, sure, yeah. So my parents are from India. They are from Calcutta in India, and they got married there, and my dad was a doctor. So at the time, England needed doctors. And there was a lot of kind of advertising, come to your Commonwealth home. And by then my uncle, so my mum's brother, was already living in London. So they decided they were actually wanted to live in America. That was the original plan. And it was like, come to England en route and see the family and kind of see England. And my dad actually had a job at a hospital in America. So I could have been American.
Wow.
They got to England. At the time, they're called the £3 generation. You're only allowed to bring £3 each. So that's all they came with. And I've grown up my whole life hearing them talk about the £3 they came with and how they made a life here. And so they arrived in England. It wasn't what they were expecting. They arrived in December, which isn't a great month to arrive from India to London. Sort of descended, and it was cold and dark, and there was no kind of central heating in places. And there was a lot of racism, so they would try and rent rooms like in houses, and there would be signs up in the window saying no coloureds. So it was like pretty harsh times. This was 1969, so it was like really quite harsh times. So having got all these doctors over here, when they arrived, actually life was quite hard for them. So my parents actually travelled around quite a lot because my dad had worked in different hospitals. Kind of around London, but then a bit around the country as well, because what happened in those times is immigrant doctors would only be able to get jobs in the places where other people didn't want to work mostly. So job ads would say things like, British-born applicants only and things like that. So it was quite hard times. So at some point, my parents decided to get out of London because there was a lot of racism there. My family, uncles and aunts and everything were all in London. And my parents decided to do something completely different and move out. So I grew up in a very small town called Lowestoft, which is in East Anglia in Suffolk. It's the round bit on the side of England, point of Britain. That's where I grew up, and it's because my parents just decided to get away from all of that and go somewhere completely different. And it meant we had a very different upbringing to people that lived in London. So in the small town where I grew up, my dad was the doctor there, he was the GP, and he saw families, he would see them be born and was their doctor right till they grew up and everything. And
that's so sweet.
Yeah, and we were the only Indian family in town. So it was quite different, I think, to the experience where that people had in places like London. So mostly people were interested and would want to know about us, and wanted to try food that my mum would cook and things like that. So it was mostly quite a nice existence in that respect. But there were problems along the way too at school and things like that. But it was a funny time because gradually more people would come who were from India, and so doctors in the hospital would look up names in the register, and if they saw someone Indian sounding, they'd just contact them. So Dad used to work in the hospital as well. So we used to have random people coming around for dinner that they'd never met because they were Indian.
Oh, I love that. That must have been so nice actually, because it's when you're not surrounded by a lot of people that look like you, it's kind of like, oh hi, let's just be friends anyway.
Yeah, and it was for the community and the food, and it helped those people deal with racism they did face. And it was, yeah, so it kind of grew and grew from there. And so, my parents settled there, made lots of friends there. And it was always, for me, felt like there was life in East Anglia that was quite quiet and things like that. And then I would go to London to see my family, all my uncles and aunts and lots of cousins and things, and we'd maybe go to something like a festival, like a Hindu festival, and it would just be such a contrast because it would be so noisy. And like it's all about noise and fun and food and all of that, and lots of real contrast. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I'd like to hear more about your school experience. Tell us about, like how was school for you personally?
Yeah, so I went to an all-girls school, and it was, I don't have great memories of it. It was, most people were white. It was very much about that kind of culture. I remember like a music class where a music teacher was talking about whether you'd watched Last Night of the Proms, and I was like, I don't even know what that is, and it was kind of everybody would laugh at you, and they would do things like not be able to say my name properly. It's why my full name is actually not Mo, it's Moshami, and I always shortened it from school because they would like get to my name in the register and say, we don't know how to say that, and it wasn't a great experience. They did. I guess the whole thing was built around everyone being very similar and everyone being the same, and I wasn't sporty and I wasn't those things, so I was different, and I think it actually shaped who I am, because actually I like being the person that's different since then, and I'm quite happy to disagree with people and things like that, and I think it
not like the same things and stuff.
Exactly. I think it comes from all of that, where I guess as a kid I learned how to deal with being the one that was different. That's when I then came to Brighton. I came to Sussex University in Brighton to study English, and that was amazing from day one. I absolutely loved it, because I chose Sussex deliberately because I knew it had a reputation for kind of activism and like student politics, and that there was lots of international students, and I loved it from day one. So I studied all sorts of interesting literature, kind of Black women's writing, Caribbean literature, Indian writers, and it was just quite eye-opening that I was suddenly amongst a really international community, and everyone was different, and people liked talking politics, and it just felt like so much more that I could be myself than school years. Definitely.
What happened after university? Did you know what you wanted to do when you left, or did you have a plan?
Like many graduates,
a 5-year plan?
Yeah, I didn't really have a plan. So then I went to a company called E2V, who are in the science and technology company, and that was eye-opening because they're not diverse at all.
Oh.
At all. So I'm trying to think how many people they had there then. A few thousand, and maybe 20% were women. And of those women, a lot were in the sort of lower level roles. So that company, I did really well there. Because the team I joined was a sales team of all men. And actually my first interview there, I remember what the guy said to me that was interviewing me, we've never employed a woman in this role before. And I was like, okay.
Right.
Okay.
Not off to a great start.
Yeah, and I have this thing when people say things like that, I have to prove them wrong. So I was like,
though. That is the best way to be.
I was determined to do well in that role, and I did well. I sold a lot. I ended up outselling everyone in the team. I won the Salesperson of the Year award at the corporation. They had like a whole maybe 60, 70 salespeople. I did really well, and like I closed like the biggest deal in their company's history and things like that.
Gosh.
I was like, yeah, I'll show you all.
Well done.
Yeah, so then I got promoted a couple of times, and I ended up in a great role, which was Vice President of Sales and Marketing, and I had an international team. So I had a team in the US, a team in Asia, a team in Europe. I was traveling a lot, wasn't at home that much. It was, now I look back on it, I don't know how I used to do all of that.
Yeah, that is like the jet set lifestyle.
Yeah.
And that's a lot as well. I mean, what was that like, managing different teams literally around the world in different time zones. That sounds crazy.
I mean, it was brilliant in lots of ways because you got to talk to different people all around the world, and it was fantastic. And they're all so different. It was brilliant, but it was really stressful. So I'd have like the Asia team, somebody would want to call me early in the morning, and then somebody in the US would want to speak to me in the evening. Like in California, it's a different time zone. And then on the days when I went to the office, I'd have to leave Brighton by about 6:30 in the morning, and I wouldn't be back until about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. So it was full on.
Crazy. Yeah. How did you have any energy ever?
It's a strange existence that people that have done commuting tell you about, that you just live in Brighton at the weekends, really. You don't do anything else in the week. It's very strange.
It's just on the go constantly.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So do you kind of feel like, obviously you were saying that place that you worked at, the non-diverse, the non-diversity, do you feel kind of like things have got better from then? I mean, when you left there, did you feel like they would become more diverse, or do you feel like in terms of just the workplace in general, do you think it's gotten better?
Yeah, that's interesting. So when I was there, I focused on diversity and inclusion a lot. It's kind of where my interest in actually working on it came from there. And they had a kind of fast track leadership scheme, like an MBA, and I got chosen to do that. And I specialised in diversity and inclusion and did lots of training in it and helped to drive the agenda, because they really needed to do something about it. So I think they did. So the last few years I was there, the graduates that joined seemed to be more diverse. They still had a really long way to go, though. I was in the senior management team of around sort of 100 people, and there were 10 women at that level. And then at the next level up, they had one woman who was the HR director. So there's a long way to go. And I did look up actually what their gender pay gap was when the gender pay reporting came in, and it wasn't very good. There's a lot of work to do. So like many kind of technology corporations, there's a long way to go.
Yeah, it seems to be quite a male-dominated field.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be.
No,
there are so many more like amazing women who are already existing or kind of coming up in the STEM kind of space. So yeah, one would hope that at least in the next kind of 5-10 years, even ideally now, there would be real kind of change being implemented.
Yeah.
So you're at Watch This Space at the moment.
Yeah.
How did you get into that? Kind of where did that come up in the career where you decided to ditch the jet set lifestyle?
Yeah. So let me tell you about that. So I was in that job, loving it, and it was really busy, and I was having a great time. Apart from never only seeing my husband at the weekends or when I came home late in the evening, and then 2016 came, and in 2016 the pound fell dramatically after the Brexit vote, and an American corporation took over the company that I was at, because they'd been watching the company for a while. The pound fell, they swooped in, they took it over. And that was kind of, for me, the wake-up call I needed to do something different, because suddenly I wasn't going to be at the head office anymore. I was going to have to fly to California a lot for kind of meetings and decisions and things like that. And I didn't know how I felt about being part of a huge American corporation. I was quite senior, known in the company I was at, and suddenly I was going to be one of masses. It just felt very different. They're a very male-dominated corporate tech corporation as well, and I was just like, I don't know if I want to do this now. At the time, my boss was saying, this is a great opportunity for you. You'll be able to progress, bigger teams. And I was just like, yeah, I don't know if that's what I want, though.
I don't think I want this anymore.
No, I was kind of like, I think I've got to where I was at senior management level, got the top job title of vice president. I think I was kind of like, I feel like it's time to do something different. So I cashed in my shares, resigned, and decided to come and work for a much smaller company in Brighton, software company in Brighton. And life suddenly changed because I could walk 10 minutes down the road to work. It was very different. There were no sort of corporate structures and processes. The company, Magix, who were a software company run by some guys who were friends who started the company about 20 years ago. Really relaxed atmosphere, beers in the office on a Friday. I hadn't experienced anything like that. In the corporation I was at, you had to even, you know, buy your own tea and coffee. There was no kind of, yeah, it's very different in companies where there's thousands of people. Life's very different. So I was suddenly like, oh my God, I've got all this time. It's amazing. So I'd been mentored when I was at the corporation. So I decided I wanted to mentor with some of my free time. So I started mentoring for a charity called the Girls Network with some of my free time that I had. And then I also joined a group in writing called Brighton Digital Women, which is about kind of a networking group for women to meet and talk about different subjects that's been going for a while, and got to know Rachel and Allegra, who run that. And that was all going well until we got to lockdown.
Oh.
And
Wonderful.
during one of our many lockdown Zoom calls, the three of us were like, shall we try and make this a business so that we bring together the work we're already doing under a company? So that's where Watch This Space came from. We started Watch This Space, and it's been amazing. It's going brilliantly, really interesting. And we all feel like this is what we're meant to be doing now.
Oh, that must be just like the most amazing feeling. I think that's what you want out of life, kind of ultimately, to love what you do and love your life in general.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess tell us a bit more about kind of what Watch This Space, what do they do?
So we're a diversity and inclusion consultancy. So we work with all kinds of workplaces to help them reimagine what they do to include everyone. And what that means is all different levels of things we do. So we run webinars and kind of sessions that people can join. We've got online training courses, but we also do work where we work with an organisation to look at their processes, recruitment, retention. Do they have coaching? Do they have mentoring? Have they done unconscious bias training? Are they comfortable talking about those things? You know, so all kinds of work with them. We look at their communications, their marketing, how people present. I think as well with the recruitment, it's not just recruiting people from diverse backgrounds. It's what's the experience like for those people, and how long do they stay, and how are they supported? So it's putting all those things in place so that we can create happier workplaces.
Oh, that is so important and fitting, I think, especially in the time that we're living now, where things seem to be coming out of the woodwork a little bit more in terms of things like unconscious bias. I think that's actually quite an important topic to discuss, because I know you have mentioned that unconscious bias seems to play quite a large role in
so when we decided to launch Watch This Space, the summer and all of the Black Lives Matter movement, protests and things hadn't happened at that point. That was afterwards, and it felt like, oh, we were really meant to be doing this. And I haven't seen the discussion around racism, structural racism, unconscious bias at the way it's being discussed now ever, I don't think. So it's so out in the open.
Absolutely.
And actually, I've never seen it before. Really never seen it before. And I think it's still not everyone who's comfortable with talking about these things. I've had really difficult conversations with friends too.
Likewise. Yeah.
So there's still a long way to go, but it's at least a discussion that people can have now. And, you know, you can talk to people about where there might be things they can work on, because everyone has unconscious biases. It's like, that's the other thing I've had to say to people, you know, I'm not saying I don't have any, everybody has them. It's not,
but it's just about acknowledging the fact that they do exist. And like, it's time to really kind of assess and change those things.
And how structural it is, how everything we do, everything around life is built on a default of being white. And how systemic the changes are. I mean, I was reading something the other day about Brunswick Square in Brighton, which is one of the squares on the seafront, and the history of it, and how it was actually, I think, 16 different slave owners that owned that.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, the history and wealth of Brighton is built on those things.
Then, you know, it's time to really have those harsh and uncomfortable discussions, because, you know, obviously no one likes talking about them, you know, not being a good person, or no one likes to think that they're not a good person. But, you know, there's a lot of kind of things underneath the woodwork, I think, that need to really be drawn out.
And also how people perceive those conversations. Like, I'm not saying anybody needs to feel guilt because their ancestors might have been a slave owner. You know, they weren't responsible for that. people in the past. But if we don't acknowledge those things and learn about them and understand, then we can't move on. Like we can't, because it's so structural, those things in our society. And so those are, I don't know about you, but for me, those have been the difficult conversations I've had with people where they find it all really difficult. Even the term white people, I've had friends problems with that.
Really?
I don't know. Yeah,
just because, are you okay to talk about that? Because I feel like the term, you know, Indian people or Black people or Asian people is not something problematic to say. So it's quite interesting that.
Yeah, I mean, I think terminology has been a huge discussion actually. So I don't know why it is, but there are some people that find the term white people difficult, and you know that needs to be unpicked as to why they think that, because everybody else has a label, gets talked about in a certain way. Then there's the whole discussion around the term white privilege, which has been so problematic. There's a particular friend of mine who we've actually agreed that it's probably best we don't talk about it.
Oh, really?
Get his head around what it means, and that it doesn't mean you live in riches in a castle. You know, it's a discussion that some people find very difficult. And then for me, that some of the other terminology is difficult too. So I don't want to say I'm a BAME person. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm Indian.
Yeah.
You know, British. You know, I'm not. Yeah, I don't want to. I'm not going to say walk around saying hi. I'm a BAME person.
Yeah, I also personally have an issue with that, because I don't think that it's fair to lump everyone that isn't white together, because you wouldn't do that, you know, to someone. You wouldn't say, oh, all Irish, Scottish and English people are the same. Like everyone has their differences, and I think it's almost annoying that it's become an acceptable term to, you know, recognize people that aren't of white origin.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that definitely needs to kind of be undone, because that's also definitely like a structural thing that is so widely accepted now, that I think they're sort of like, oh well, we've made this for you now, so you should just accept it. But that's not the case.
There's so many problems with it, and I think it's a way, as you say, of lumping people together, and it's a way of trying to almost brush away some of the experiences. So my experience as somebody from quite a privileged background, doctor's daughter, grew up in East Anglia in a nice house and everything, that my experience with racism is very different to, you know, a Black youngster living in an inner city part of London, for example, that might get stopped and searched by the police a lot. You know, they're very different experiences, and to lump everybody together is just so problematic that I try and stay away from those terms that lump people together like that.
Yeah, likewise. I actually want to talk about kind of your thoughts on the current climate and situation. Obviously, we've briefly touched on the Black Lives Matter movement that kind of really erupted early June time. I'm interested to see like kind of what you would hope for in the future, say in the next 5 years, like what kind of changes you'd like to see in the world.
So I think the discussion has been a shock to society, actually, this discussion that's come up this summer. And I think there is a lot of desire amongst a lot of people to do something about it and to address it. But there's also a lot of people that are resisting it, don't agree with it. You know, there's a long way to go. So over the next few years, what I would like to see is the structural issues addressed. So companies saying, oh, we don't hire people from diverse backgrounds because they don't apply. That isn't good enough. Companies saying, you know, we are diverse because we've got different educational experiences when they're all white men on the board of a company. That's not good enough.
And they're like, well, I went to Eton and he went to Oxford and he went to Cambridge.
That's not good enough. And then saying, you know, well, some people join from different backgrounds and they don't stay very long. That's not good enough either. Why didn't they stay? Like, what happened? And then, you know, wider than that, there's the sort of political side of it. Local government, the council in Brighton are not representative at all. There's only one councillor who isn't white.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So over the next 5 years is the opportunity to make some of those big structural changes. So that's what I'd like to see. So not just tokenism, not just ticking boxes, like actual changes that are going to change society is what I want to see. I know
not thinking, oh, here's a quota that we need to fill of people from BAME backgrounds. Okay, yeah, let's hire 5 people that aren't white. Yeah, that's not
actually
good enough.
There has to be actual like desire to change things. So when with Watch This Space, we do point out the benefits of diversity as well. We talk about that a lot. There's some good reading around how diverse teams come up with more creative, innovative products, make better decisions, collaborate. There's all of those great reasons, but actually fundamentally the reason for it is it's the right thing to do to address policy in society. Yeah.
I think that's what shocks me, to be honest, because it's like, how could you, it shocks me that there's people that don't want people to be equal. Like, we shouldn't even be having to say like, oh, you shouldn't think that, like, it should just be the norm that everyone is equal and everyone can be accepted everywhere. And it's shocking that people can deny that that exists. And I understand it's not in their peripheral all the time. I think that's probably the issue, because a lot of people are uncomfortable when the Black Lives Matter movement kind of blew up, because it's not something that they have to think about all the time. And it was so in their face and like literally everywhere. You couldn't look anywhere without, something being mentioned. And that's what the issue is. And you're kind of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that there are people still out there that have no idea that a lot of these things go on and there's change that needs to be made.
Yeah, and it's people's perception of what those changes are that need to be made. So again, people think that there are discussions I had where they think that racism is, people being violent towards you or shouting things at you. And I'm like, those things have happened to me. Yes, of course they have. But that's not the everyday experience of racism. The everyday experience of racism is all the insidious, subtle things in our society.
Minor comments and experiences, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for example, it isn't that many years ago that I had a work colleague who used to call me curry powder all the time. And if I got kind of stroppy about it, be like, oh, she can't take a joke, can she? It's things like that.
Yes.
And those sort of small things, that's probably quite an extreme example, but there are other.
Well, it shouldn't even have to be labelled as an extreme example. Like, that is just bad, full stop.
But there are so many other things like that, so many other examples that I think people who are white don't understand because they've never had to experience it, and that they're lucky they haven't had to experience it. And again, I've had to use those kinds of terms to talk about what we mean by white privilege, that we're not saying you're wealthy and you're rich. We're saying that you haven't had to live a life of those experiences. So again, there was somebody I was talking to just the other day, and it was getting late, and I was like, so you can just walk down the road now without thinking about it. That's your privilege. I couldn't do that.
Because it's scary because you just don't know.
You really don't.
It's crazy. It really is.
And
I mean, I'm so sorry that you even had to work with someone that thinks that like that's funny, because it's just not funny at all.
Well, he was actually one of those salespeople in that team that I worked in, where I ended up beating them all and becoming the boss.
Well, you showed him.
Anyway, yeah.
He doesn't matter. He's just an afterthought. I'm interested to know, actually, do you ever feel kind of like your race has ever held you back in your career, in life in general? Have there been kind of any obstacles that you feel like, oh gosh, can't get over this?
That's an interesting one, because I feel like my career has been quite successful, but I know but I know that I've had to fight for everything, and it's been hard work, and it's still hard work, and all of those things. So I guess maybe not held back, because I've always been quite ambitious and have done the things I wanted to do. So, if I wanted a job somewhere, I usually can get that, and I can, get deals and things. I just think it's hard. It can be really hard work for all sorts of reasons. Being a woman in tech companies can be very hard work. There's horror stories there as well, in my early days, where I'd be spoken down to, asked to make the coffee, things like that. And you have to learn how to deal with those things to progress. And that's the world I don't want for future generations. They shouldn't have to be like that at all. So I think my successes have been hard won. So I would say probably not held back as such. I think probably my school experience in early life always made me determined to be different and kind of
get out of that, and not even allow certain things that might go on to hinder, your life experiences or your successes.
Yeah. And as a child of immigrants and a family of immigrants, as kids, we were always told, all of us, all my cousins and I, and uncles and aunts, parents would say to us, you have to be better than everyone else. Like, failure was not an option. You have to be better than everyone else. It was like pressure for exam grades and all of those things, because they would say, life is tougher for you. You have to. So it's kind of ingrained all the way along.
And it shouldn't have to be. And I hope that it's not. And I hope that, with all of this conversation that's going on, proper change can be made, especially in those, really important structural developments like, the police, or even in large corporations, industries, that there isn't that feeling.
I'd love to see our politicians being people that actually represent the population. Yeah,
absolutely. Because it doesn't always seem like that at the moment. But I mean, fingers crossed. I know we were talking about the election before this.
Yes.
So we'll kind of see what happens there. But it's actually been really lovely to chat. I don't know if you have any closing remarks for us. Anything you want to plug?
It's quite a strange day because of wanting to see what's happened in the election. It's been an interesting year for so many reasons. I am really interested in politics. I love seeing Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand winning her election.
She's amazing.
Yeah, you'd hope that we do come out of this crazy year and create a better world where it's fairer, because I think the pandemic highlighted so many inequalities in society.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I really hope this is the start of change and a better world. I know that sounds quite dramatic.
Like a story. But no, I couldn't agree more. I think this year has been tough, for everyone, but in terms of actual change and, moving forward from this, I would hope that people really kind of assess what's going on in the world and try to make a real difference.
Yeah, definitely.
100 Stories was inspired by the hundreds of brave people of colour who have felt the Black Lives Matter movement has given them an opportunity to share their stories and experiences. This series coincides with the increasing demand and interest from allies who want to better understand the forms of prejudice and microaggressions that take place every day. We want our 100 Stories to be an accessible platform for Black people in and around our community to share their stories, either anonymously or openly. We do this in a bid to keep the conversation alive and continue to help people understand what it's like when you don't have a seat at the table. If you're interested in sharing one of your stories, please get in touch via media@sync.co.uk. Thanks for listening.